another skill we've been really working on and honing and figuring out is the skill of interviewing.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter who you are. Like if you're in the podcasting game, you could be Rogan, you could be James Altucher, you could be Lex Friedman, you could be Sam Harris, you could be anyone. You could be, people like Harpreet or Grace Gong or Punkage or Sean off of, their, smaller podcasts that are just in our peers. But it doesn't matter who you are. We're all working on interviewing, and you think
Mm-hmm.
about the number of styles that we've had to like prepare for just based off of reading. It's pretty interesting because like I'll find myself preparing, and I'll always want to read the book obviously and then do a little bit of research on the person, but they don't know what you're going to ask. So think about how awkward it is for them, to be on with the record button, and they're kind of like giving us the cushion to create this, event. And like the three of us are working along, like I'm working along your cues, you're working along mine, we're working along the guests. And it's really interesting dynamic if you think about the trio coming together and how quickly rapport needs to be built, and how you have to kind of show that you did the homework, right? So you ask a question to start the conversation that makes it clear that you read the book. Maybe it's from the last part of the book. So it's just these little things that we're all kind of working on if you're in this. And obviously, like, you think about the different styles, like Stern had his own style, Oprah had her own style, Rogan has his own style. We all have our own styles, and we're all trying to figure this out.
Yeah, well, on the topic of Rogan and Stern and your comments around how we're kind of three voices in the one space together, I think one tip we might give to people who are co-hosting a show together, we found that you really can't have two people steering at the same time. And I think what's different about us relative to someone like Rogan, who has a Jamie, or Howard Stern, who has a Robin Quivers, where there's that permanent lead interviewer and permanent sidekick dynamic, you and I kind of flex back and forth. So sometimes you lead, sometimes I lead. And to be clear, no episode ever gets too lopsided. It's always meant to be a three-way conversation, but we have only one person open. We have only one person close. We found that one person sort of needs to have the right of way to propel the conversation forward, because when you're interviewing, you really can't have two people steering the ship at the same time.
Great point. And interestingly enough, in our own development, you and I remember we used to kind of game plan for these episodes, like, hey, here's what I'm going to bring to the table. You would talk about your angle, and we'd kind of know what was going to occur between us a little bit. But if you think about recently, we don't even do that anymore. We
No,
just
I
go
know.
into these conversations just, okay, I know I got to do the intro and kind of guide it, and then that's it.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? I haven't really thought about that, but why do you think we listed towards that style?
Because when it's too structured, the common trap, and like I realize the points where in my own conversations with several folks, like when I watch the tape, I know there are points where I could have expanded on what that person just said as opposed to going back to what was on like my list of questions. Now, here's the interesting thing about that, though. It's like
Mm-hmm.
we do have really interesting questions that I really do want to ask, right? But sometimes the conversation doesn't really allow for it. And you kind of just have to play off what that person is saying. And that's something that I think we figured out after doing a few and realizing, okay, it doesn't really make sense for both of us to come super prepared. Actually, you need more flexibility. Otherwise, you kind of, it's too stale of a conversation. It's not as dynamic as it could be.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the interesting thing around that, it's like, again, going back to some things I've noticed about myself, like the one conversation that really, really stuck out with me that kind of changed how I looked at all of this was the one with Dean Karnassus.
Mm.
Um, I mean, at that time, just where we were in this journey, he was by far the biggest guest that we were going to have. And just the whole way it all came together, I know going into that conversation, I was a little bit nervous. And I remember, like, again, thinking about it from his perspective, he must have been like, I don't know what these two are going to ask me. Like, I have 45 minutes. They read my book. That's great, but I don't know. And I look back on that conversation. I really feel like I could have asked deeper questions, more questions. And it was the first time where I realized where like this person was actually trying to give me the leeway to like create something, and I didn't do it. And that
Mm.
really like stuck with me because it like really shined a light on just the different styles of people that we're going to encounter. And some people are going to give you short answers and some people are going to give you long answers. And that's a whole dynamic in itself.
Yeah, no, I think there's a kind of balancing act between depth and pacing. So it's like you don't want to leave a topic too prematurely. And to your point, you don't know exactly how much the guests will give you. So you're kind of threading the needle the whole time because you're not exactly sure how much substance will come back from a specific question. But you don't want to leave a topic too prematurely if there's still fertile ground there to explore. You want to make use of it, but you also at the same time have to be ready to move on even if there's something else that you feel could be added. It's like there's this algorithm, I think, running in your head when you're considering whether or not you want to linger on a topic. You have to think about like how additive would the next comment be if we were to stay here? Is it redundant? Is what I'm about to say not that interesting? Has 40% of what I'm about to say already been said? Is that like 60% worth lingering for? And again, I think it's this kind of balancing act of depth and pacing. You want to go just deep enough where you mine a subject for its valuable content, but at the same time, you need to be ready to move on to keep the pace of the conversation flowing.
And this is an R structure where we have created this dynamic of, hey, let's, within an hour to maybe 90 minutes, we have a conversation. And at the end of the day, we want them to also be able to sell copies of their book, right? Like we can't talk about everything.
Right,
We'd be here
right.
for 3.5 hours. Yeah, but it's really interesting. That's why I like to listen to other people's podcasts and be a student of the game. I've learned from so many other people, especially from that conversation that I pinpointed that really like that I felt like was one of my Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan moments where I like looked
Mm.
at the tape, I dissected myself, and I was like,
Mm.
body language wise, questioning wise, everything, dude. And that's why I really enjoy being a student of the game because I like to learn from what other people are doing, how they tee up questions, the language that they use. I mean, there's so many people out there that are so creative. Um, one idea that I heard from James Altucher, actually, who,
Mm.
interesting enough, on one of his recent podcasts was talking about something similar to this conversation around interviewing skills. But you and I have been talking about this, and it's interesting that we're actually finally putting it out there on the airways. But here's an idea that I want to try out in the future with another guest is look at the acknowledgments, see who they're acknowledging or what they say at the end of the book, and then bring that up
Mm.
as the start of the conversation. Like, hey, why
Mm.
did you acknowledge this person?
And it maybe if it's not a guest that's written a book, who have they listed in their bio as like a key mentor or someone like that? I'm just thinking out loud, but go to their influences because that's something that they're going to be able to speak passionately about. And I think also on that topic, for me, as it relates to authors, one of the benefits we have of being able to read our guest book ahead of time is we can make note of sentences that provide a little bit of a tip as to what is most interesting to them. So like when I'm reading these books,
Nice.
I look out for sentences that are like, and I want to note that this concept is really important to me. Or in a couple of books we've read, we've had authors say, and I believe this is where my theory differs from other people in the field. So I think if you focus on that stuff, the stuff that's most interesting to them, I think that's what makes for the most interesting conversation. And that's something that has been a humbling process for me as well, realizing that we're creating space for this guest. As you said, they're coming into this conversation with the two of us. They don't know exactly what we're going to ask out of a sort of, I guess, not just a courtesy, but in the interest of making it the most interesting conversation possible. I want to focus on what they're most passionate about, not necessarily what I found most interesting. I think there's certainly space to explore maybe the more esoteric topics in the book that I found interesting or you found interesting, but I've been working to anchor the meat of the conversation around what seems to be most important to them as the guest.
No, that's great advice. And it works. I mean, that's, I think, one of the best part about this entire experience has been some of the offline conversations and some of them that have been, still online where, the guests actually realize that we did put in the work. and we did research, and it's like, this is the process that's worked. It's great, and it's making us better. And I find myself like in normal conversations now. It's helping me in normal everyday conversations where I'm better off at listening. I'm better off at being able to like remember what the person was saying,
Yeah.
and then be able to go back and like double back with them. That used to be one of the weakest things for me. It's like this person just said something. It's like, oh, I got to ask my question right there. Otherwise, I'm going to forget. Or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like, I'm so stuck to what I have in my head that I want to say that all of a sudden, like, I'm not going to be able to balance this new information coming in at me. And so, this idea of just letting go, surrendering, allowing the space, and like being more flexible. Now I find myself, it's easy, not easier. It's just, I can noticeably feel the difference in my ability to hold off on asking questions that were pertaining to something that may have been discussed 2 minutes ago, or in your words, a couple beats back. I love
Exactly.
that phrase. I love that phrase. It's the best. It's a great way to go back on something without saying the word circle back.
Right, right, right. Yeah, you want to avoid that.